there, are you a fellow dog person or just an interested fan of science? Maybe you clicked on this video because you have a dog and you want to know what's going on inside their head. Dogs have been called man's best friend, and in this video I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about the canine brain. Hello Neuronauts, Cognic here, and welcome back to the channel where we talk about all things brain. In this video, I'm going to teach you all about dog brains because I made a video about cat brains before and yeah, give the people what they want. In this video, we're going to talk about the size and structure of dog brains and compare them to the brains of other animals. We're also going to talk about canine behavior and intelligence, and we're going to talk about some ways that dogs have been used in famous neuroscience research. Then we're going to chat about some canine parasites and brain diseases, and finally we'll talk about the dog equivalent of catnip called Anise. Before we begin, we are super close to 400 subscribers, so consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. Your support helps me make videos like this, and subscribing is free, so why not? Also, if this video isn't enough and you want to hear me talk more, I had a great conversation with Andrew Cooper Sansone on his channel Sense of Mind. I'll link it in the description below. It's about an hour long. It's podcast style conversation. You get to hear me ramble on about all things neuroscience. It'll be great. Check it out. Now, without further ado, let's talk about dog brains. There are many breeds of dogs out there, and they all look wildly different. I mean, Chihuahuas are dogs and German Shepherds are dogs, so how on earth would they have the same brain? The truth is, they don't. While all dogs have the same general brain parts, there's actually a lot of variation between the brains of different dog breeds. A 2019 paper in the Journal of Neuroscience found that there was significant variation in the brain volume of different dog breeds. That means that different breeds of dogs had different sized brains. Crazy, right? Who knew? The interesting part is that they found that not only were the size and shape different between dog breeds, but so were the ways that the brains were wired up. Different dog breeds have different networks and neural circuits that are put together in different ways. The researchers found that the differences in brains between dog breeds had less to do with the size and shape of the dogs, and actually had more to do with what the dogs were bred for. In other words, when we bred some dogs to be police dogs and other dogs to be hunting dogs and some dogs to be lap dogs, we were selecting for the behaviors that we wanted. Behavior comes from the brain, so when we were breeding different types of dogs with different behaviors, we were actually breeding different types of brains. Breed differences aside, let's talk about the structure of the average dog brain. Dogs have an olfactory bulb in the front of the brain where the sense of smell is processed. A dog's olfactory bulb can compose about 2% of the dog's total brain mass, while a human's olfactory bulb can only compose about 0.03% of our total brain mass. This is likely one of the reasons that dogs are so talented when it comes to their sense of smell. Dogs also have a cerebrum, or what we would think of as the main part of the brain. The canine cerebrum is made of 3 sections: the frontal lobe, the temporal lobes, and the occipital lobe. Dogs also have a cerebellum, which plays important roles in coordinating movements and balancing. Like in many other animals, a dog's brainstem is the part of the brain that connects to the spinal cord. The canine spinal cord, as you may have guessed, runs through a dog's spine and connects to the peripheral nerves, which branch out into the dog's limbs and organs. Different breeds of dogs have different amounts of neurons in their brains, but a good average value that gets cited in literature is about 2.25 billion neurons in the average canine brain, not including the olfactory bulb. So if anybody ever asks you how many brain cells your dog has, you can say roughly 2.25 billion. My dog acts like she has 3 brain cells, but I love her so much. If you have a dog, tell me what type you have and something funny that they do in the comments down below. I can't wait to read about all your cute doggos. Now let's compare the average dog brain of about 2.25 billion neurons to some other animals' brains. The average human brain has about 86 billion neurons, which is about 38 times more than the average dog brain. To better compare dog brains to the brains of other animals, I created this graph using data from a paper by Deborah Jardim-Meseder et al. On the x-axis, I put different animals, and on the y-axis, I put the number of neurons in their brains divided by 100 million. Note that these numbers don't include neurons in the olfactory bulb. Ferrets, banded mongooses, cats, and raccoons have less brain cells than dogs. Cats, in particular, have about 1.21 billion neurons, so about a billion neurons less than the average dog. Raccoons are actually very similar to dogs in neuron count, with only an 100 million neuron difference or so. That may seem like a lot, but 100 million isn't all that much of a difference considering animals of this scale. Hyenas, lions, and bears all have more neurons than the average dog. In brains, more neurons doesn't always mean smarter, but it does mean that there can be more possible connections. More connections allow for more complex processing, and neuron count is definitely correlated with intelligence. Speaking of intelligence, dogs do all sorts of funny things and have some really weird and intelligent behaviors. Let's talk about some cool and weird abilities that dog brains have. First, just to get this out of the way, let's explain why dogs eat poop. That may not seem like an intelligent behavior, but dogs have a reason for doing it. Throughout evolution, dogs have been scavengers and they've developed really intense digestive systems. The leading theory is that dogs eat poop because they can actually extract nutrients from it, even though it's already been digested by themselves or by another animal. Just think of it as dogs giving their food around too to go through so they can get every last vitamin and mineral. Okay, so we addressed the poop thing, now let's move on to the other behavioral stuff. Firstly, dogs can recognize and process human faces. A study from 2016 showed that dogs may process faces in the same way that humans and primates might. The researchers put dogs in an fMRI machine and showed them pictures of human faces while scanning their brain activity. When dogs were shown human faces, there was activity in their temporal lobes on both sides of the brain. That's a fancy way of saying that just about here, there was a little bit of activity. The research suggests that dogs have developed a face processing pathway that can be triggered by human faces. Dogs also have the ability to learn their names. It's well understood that when you call a dog by its name, it can respond, which means that it can commit that name to memory. There's a lot of confusion though about what a dog's name actually means to them. Dogs actually fail the mirror self-awareness test, which means that they might not be able to recognize themselves in the mirror. Dogs do pass other self-awareness tests like being able to recognize their own smell, but canine self-awareness seems to be a bit limited. Because of this, it seems unlikely that when you call a dog by their name, they actually think, oh, that's me. It's more likely that dogs learn their name as a command. If your dog's name is Spot and you go, Spot, your dog probably just thinks that they have to come over there. Their name probably means the same thing to them as come here. In other words, a dog's name may just be a command to them, like sit, stay, or lay down. Like humans, however, dogs do respond to the cocktail party effect. Imagine that you're at a cocktail party and there's conversations happening all around you. Even if you're in a conversation and there's chaos going on all around you, if someone says your name in one of those conversations, you may perk up and pay attention to it. This is the cocktail party effect, and dogs display this effect as well. According to a 2019 study, dogs actually exhibit the cocktail party effect in the same way that humans do. Even in a room full of distracting stimuli and conversations, a dog may still respond to mention of their name. Dogs, when being spoken to by humans, actually recognize and use eye contact for communication purposes. According to one 2013 study, dogs actually use human eye contact to detect if speech is being directed towards them. Saying commands like sit and calling a dog's name have a much greater effect when you're looking directly at the dog. The eye contact tells the dog you're being addressed right now. Okay, it's time. I'm gonna go on a rant about these things. There are videos all throughout social media where people have their dogs talk to them through word button boxes. Now, in my humble opinion, which is backed up by evidence, this is silly. Dogs have been shown in some instances to recognize a wide variety of words. In one case, a dog had a vocabulary estimated at about 200 words. But dogs aren't people, and we have to stop pretending that dogs are people. Dogs don't learn language the same way a human learns language. Humans learn words for objects in the environment and abstract ideas, and then we stitch those words together into sentences and speech so that we can communicate about complex things. It's pretty clear that dogs don't do this. Even if your dog uses one of these boxes and hits the buttons on it, it doesn't mean that your dog understands how to speak. If your dog hits the walk button and then you take them for a walk, the dog will be classically conditioned eventually to realize that hitting that button means I get to go on a walk. The dog doesn't know that the button means the word walk, or that the sound that comes out of it has any importance. The dog just knows when I do blank, blank happens. I think when people make those videos with the button boxes on social media, they're generally trying to either sell those button boxes to make money, get a bunch of views because their dog's adorable, or they're trying to show how good of a dog trainer they are. I wouldn't waste your money on one of these boxes because your dog's not going to learn how to speak, but there are ways you can learn how to communicate with your dog. There's archaeological evidence that humans and dogs have lived side by side for more than 30,000 years. If you spend 30,000 years with anybody, you're gonna get to know them. If you want to communicate with your furry friend, don't try to teach them English using some button box. Try to learn their signals and their body language, because I guarantee they've started figuring out yours. Moving on, we're gonna now talk about how dogs have been used in some famous neuroscience research. Dogs have been used in many ways in neuroscience research, but here I'm gonna highlight two famous examples. First, and most famously for the psychologists in the room, dogs were the subjects in Ivan Pavlov's experiments on classical conditioning. Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov was studying the digestive glands of dogs when he noticed something fascinating. When researchers brought the dogs food, the dogs would salivate and start to drool. Eventually, the dogs would drool when they saw the lab assistants come in, food or no food. Pavlov realized that the dogs had associated the lab assistants with getting food, meaning that they had been conditioned. Pavlov's research dogs are famous in the fields of neuroscience and psychology because they led to the discovery of classical conditioning. Another Russian, a Soviet scientist named Vladimir Petrovich Demikhov, did some less famous experiments with dogs. These experiments aren't for the faint of heart, but I'm including them here because they are neuroscience related. See, Demikhov was a pioneer of organ transplantation and was probably a real mad scientist, kind of like Dr. Frankenstein. Don't believe me? Well, in 1954, Demikhov tried to transplant the head of one dog onto another. He used connections to the host dog's heart to supply blood to the newly transplanted head. The result was a two-headed dog. One head was original to the body and the other was transplanted. The first time, the transplanted head only survived for a while, but Demikhov kept these experiments going and got better results with his two-headed dogs every time. People in Russia and around the world called Demikhov unethical and mad, but he kept these experiments going. Now, I'm sorry to the dog lovers who are watching this video because these experiments sound really messed up, and in most ways they were. The upside of this work is that Demikhov contributed to the future possibility of head transplantation surgery, but he also made other scientific contributions. In fact, a South African surgeon named Christian Bernard heard of Demikhov's experiments and became convinced that he could transplant a human heart from one person to another. Christian Bernard actually visited Demikhov twice in Russia, and years later, in 1967, he performed the first human heart transplant surgery. Bernard credited Demikhov with being one of the people that made it all possible. Science can have moments of darkness, but in many cases, those moments of darkness lead to leaps and bounds that help more people in the long run. Now, while it may be a little bit upsetting, we're going to talk about brain diseases in dogs because it's important to understand the risks to the canine brain. To start, we're going to discuss rabies. Rabies is caused by a type of virus called a Lissa virus. Rabies comes from the Latin word for madness, and Lissa comes from a Greek word for violence. So in other words, rabies is madness caused by a violence virus. The two types of Lissa virus that cause rabies are the rabies virus and the Australian bat Lissa virus. Dogs are susceptible to rabies if not vaccinated, so please get your dogs vaccinated for rabies. If you don't want to get your dog vaccinated for their sake, do it for yours because dogs with rabies can transmit it to people. In many parts of the world, dogs are vaccinated against rabies, but in the parts of the world where they aren't, dog bites account for 99% of human rabies infections. In the United States, where dogs are vaccinated against rabies, bats are actually the leading cause of rabies infections in humans. Rabies can be transmitted to an animal or human if they are bitten or scratched by an animal infected with rabies. If you get bit by an animal, wash the wound with soap, water, and iodine for about 15 minutes. You may also want to consult your doctor and go to the emergency room so they can protect you against rabies. Rabies is extremely dangerous and very fatal, causing about 59,000 deaths per year worldwide. 40% of those 59,000 deaths are children under the age of 15 because children are more likely to approach infected animals. Rabies infects the nervous system and causes swelling in the brain. Symptoms of rabies include muscle paralysis and insomnia, but they can also include agitation, aggression, paranoia, and hydrophobia. Hydrophobia is the fear of water, meaning that people and animals infected with rabies gain a fear for water. I'm going to do a whole video on rabies because it's such an interesting neuroscience topic, but for now, get your dog their rabies shots and let's move on. Another neurological condition that can affect dogs is encephalitis. Encephalitis is infection and inflammation of the brain and spinal cord. Encephalitis can be caused by bacteria, viruses, fungi, or parasites, and can even be caused by tick-borne illnesses. Encephalitis can also be caused by other infections that spread to the brain and spinal cord. If your dog has a sinus infection, an ear infection, or an abscess in the head, these are things that could possibly lead to encephalitis. Meningitis is infection of the meninges, or the tough fibrous membrane that surrounds the brain. Meningitis, very much like encephalitis, can be caused by previous infections in the sinuses or ears that then spread to the meninges. If your dog has been in a fight or has what seems like an ear or sinus infection, take them to the vet and consider putting them on antibiotics. Next, we're going to talk about cerebellar degeneration, or degeneration of the cerebellum. Degeneration of the cerebellum can be caused when a dog is infected with a canine herpes virus. Remember that the cerebellum is an important part of the brain for balancing and coordinating movement. Because of this, symptoms of cerebellar degeneration can include swaying, loss of coordination, muscle tremors, and abnormal posturing, so standing in weird ways or sitting in weird ways. To end our discussion of canine brain issues, we're going to talk about parasites that can be found in dogs. Dogs are typically infected with different types of worms, like tapeworms, hookworms, heartworms, and roundworms. One type of tapeworm, called Taenia multiceps, an intestinal tapeworm that also infects humans, can cause something in dogs called Coneurosis. Coneurosis, also called gid, sturdy, or staggers, is caused when the larval stage of the tapeworm infects the nervous system, causing it to swell. As the worms in the nervous system grow to adult size, which can be about 2 inches long, they put a lot of increased pressure on the nerves and brain. This can cause loss of muscle control, stumbling, blindness, paralysis, and head tilting. Coneurosis is more common in dogs that live on farms because they're around livestock. So if you have a farm dog, you may want to deworm it more regularly. The other types of worms that I mentioned can also cause similar issues in a dog's nervous system, and some of them can be transmitted to humans. Because of this, you may want to take your dog to the vet more regularly and get them dewormed. Try to stop your dog from eating the poop of other animals, and also try to stop them from eating the carcasses or body parts of other animals. If you do want to feed your dog meat or bone products made from other animals, you may want to get them from a reputable brand or pet store. Now that we've moved past all the weird research and brain diseases, we get to talk about the dog equivalent of catnip called Anise. Anise? Anise. Anise? Anise. Anise. Anise, the catnip equivalent for dogs, comes from a plant called Pimpinella anisum. Also called anix or aniseed, this plant is native to the eastern Mediterranean. The plant has a strong licorice taste, which is why it's used to flavor candy, food, and alcoholic beverages like Greek ouzo. Opa! According to many sources, dogs react to anise the same way that cats respond to catnip. Some dogs get really excited and hyperactive. Other dogs get really sleepy and relaxed. Anise and catnip, however, work through different mechanisms. Catnip has a chemical in it called nipetolactone, which has a very similar structure to a cat pheromone. Anise has no such dog equivalent pheromone molecule. While scientists aren't sure why dogs respond the way that they do towards anise, the answer could be as simple as dogs like the smell. As we've talked about, dogs have a very large olfactory bulb and a very keen sense of smell. When dogs smell the very strong and sweet scent of anise, they may become overstimulated and therefore hyperactive. So should you give your dog anise? Probably not. Your dog would probably be fine to have some anise, but they could also get nausea and diarrhea. Also, if your dog eats or smells too much anise, they could actually get nervous system depression. A depressed nervous system can cause irregular heartbeats, and in rare cases can actually lead to death. Also remember that a lot of pet owners give their cats catnip and their dogs anise, not because it's good for the cat or dog, but because it's fun for the humans watching. If you want to expose your dog to a plant like anise, make sure you check with your vet and see that it's good for the dog, and don't do it for your own amusement. That was a hefty video about dog brains, but we have arrived at the end. Like I said, if you have a dog, tell me about them in the comments down below. If you're still here at the end of the video, please consider leaving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. Definitely make sure to check out my conversation with Andrew Cooper Sanson on all things neuroscience. The link for that is in the description. Take care of your brains, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.